Okay, welcome back. We're up to number 7 and it's panel contact. And to give you a quick refresher, if you remember, our panels are exceptionally important to spread our weight over the greatest surface area of the horse's back as possible, so we can reduce the overall pressure loading on any particular area of his back, any particular muscle. So the actual feel of our panels is what's going to give us an indication as to where pressure is being distributed. Now, you've already done a little bit of feeling for pressure under your panel when you were testing your tree shape, whether it was rocking or bridging. So now we're going to take a slightly closer look at panel contact, panel pressure, and try and work out what might be causing any issues we might be having with the actual contact or surface area that we've got on the horse's back. So same as before, we're going to run our hands underneath the saddle from front to back and really feel for any changes of pressure on our fingers. You can do it with the belly lift as well. And you're going to be feeling for any changes in the flocking. And if you've done your saddle health check, here's a big hint, you're probably already aware of it, but you may not be aware of how it was affecting your horse's back. So you're going to be feeling the panel for any changes of pressure from the flocking. You're going to be feeling for any tightness underneath the stirrup bar, and you're also going to be paying particular attention to where pressure may be increasing. So as you've already started to clue in, your seat balance, for instance, if it was tilted too far to the rear, we might be running our hands along the panel like this, and by the time we get to this point here, we get a huge increase in pressure under our hand. And that's another one of those signs that it's the balance point of the seat that is increasing the pressure under the saddle at the back of the horse. So we're going to have a quick run through again on how to feel panel pressure, and I want you to remember to feel it on both panels. Don't just do one side, go around and feel the other, because if you've got asymmetric panels or an asymmetric horse, we're going to feel different panel contact. So a quick little refresher of how to feel, whether it's a jumping saddle, dressage saddle, half breed, whatever. You're going to hold onto the flap, pop your hand underneath, and feel from the front of the panel all the way to the back. Now, I tend to feel with my fingers facing up, but I find that most useful for me. You could try fingers facing down and see what gives you the most sensitivity. Hands underneath, and I'm running my fingers all the way along this panel until I get to the back. Now, with this particular saddle, you may have already noticed that the balance point is slightly rearward. And when I feel underneath this panel, I've actually got a bridge and then a heavy pressure in under here. That's because the gullet angle is too narrow for him, creating a bridge. The balance point is tilting too far to the back, and so suddenly I've got all this pressure here, all this pressure at the front, and no contact at all in the middle there. One of the other things that I want you to take notice of is in an asymmetric horse or asymmetric panels or an asymmetric saddle, sometimes we can have a slight cant or tilt to one side. So if a horse has asymmetric hindquarters, for instance, or one of his shoulders is tilting the saddle up at the front, we're going to have our saddle on a tilt like this from behind. And you're going to get more pressure on one panel in comparison to the other. We'll probably also see the result of that when we trot the horse out in hand in movement. If you've got an asymmetric shoulder or an asymmetric hindquarter, you're going to see some saddle slip as well. Now you can imagine, even without a rider on, that's going to put more pressure on one panel and probably more to one side than it does the other. When we then put a rider on top of that, it's going to make the problem so much worse, because the rider is likely to collapse in a hip as well, loading more seat bone on one side, pushing the saddle even further over. So usually we see two problems. We see more pressure under the cantle on one side, but we also see the saddle doing a little twist along its length, so we've got more pressure of the panel against one side of the wither as well. Unless your horse is roly-poly and it doesn't have much wither, and then the saddle just shoots off to one side. So you'll notice that one straight away. It's actually worse, I think, for horses with withers, because it's the wither that stops the saddle from massively dropping over. And it's getting a load of pressure in the wither pocket on one side and also up against the vertebra on one side. Okay, so now we're going to talk about panel pitch and checking the panel pitch and its suitability for your horse. So if you remember again back to our saddle construction and your horse's back profile, you'll start to see that things need to match up. So our panel pitch is the shape that our panels make this way. So you might have a broad flat saddle with a flat tree, and your panels might be nice and flat in their profile along that. Now that's going to suit a broad flat-backed horse. Or you might have a more triangular shaped tree, and your panels could be quite pitchy and triangular this way. Now obviously if we put this pitchy shaped panel on our broad flat-backed horse, we're going to have more pressure on the outside edge and less contact on the inside edge. So suddenly we've got this concentration of pressure all the way along one side of the panel with not enough contact on the inside. So that actually reduces your weight distribution or the bearing surface of your saddle for your weight, increasing the pressure on your horse's back on the bit that is touching his back. So panel contact and panel pitch is important. Also panel shape to a certain extent. If you've got a rolling pin shaped panel, you've actually only got contact down the center. So you've only got your weight distribution happening on a very thin, skinny area here. Also, if your panels are quite narrow in shape, you've only got a limited amount of surface area to spread your weight over the horse's back, so it increases the pounds per square inch, the pressure on the horse's muscles yet again. So there's a lot to think about. And then the other problem that we might have is we might actually have an A-frame shaped horse, our slightly triangular shape, with a flat pitched panel. Now we're going to have pressure on the inside edge, contact on the inside edge, with not very much of the panel on the outside edge contacting the horse's back. So we have increased pressure along the edges of the spine, very close to the spine, high pressure, reduced surface area on the horse's back. So panel pitch is really, really important. Ideally, we want the panels to be running parallel to our horse's back and using as much of the surface area of the horse's back as we can. So when we look at our horse's back, we're looking from where the panel can start, below the paraspinal ligament, remember how wide we need this channel, to where the breakover of his ribs are. So each horse can be a little bit different with that as well. Some horses have very slab sides and they drop off quickly, and there's not very much width for us to actually stick a panel. Some horses go exceedingly broad and flat laterally. We've got a lot more space we can use for the shape of a panel. So all of that really matters when it comes to pressure distribution. The best way to actually look at your panel pitch of your saddle is to climb up behind him on a mounting block or milk crate, whatever it is that is safe, and to do it safely. You can do it from a long way back out of kicking range, or you can do it close up, and I choose to do it close up with my hands over the horse's hindquarters. I find for me that's the safest area, and I can gauge my horse by feeling and touching the horse really well. So I'm going to climb up behind and we're going to look at the pitch of the panel on the horse to see if it's matching the pitch of the horse's back. We can also have a little look down through the front. Now you possibly would have already felt this when you felt under your panel for panel contact. If you've got a very triangular shaped panel, when you were running your hands under, you may have already felt that there was an increase of pressure along this outside edge. That can often happen actually with foam paneled saddles, where the horse has a broader back and foam panels, because they don't mold to the horse's back shape. And it's actually quite easy to feel. Sometimes it's harder to feel that pressure on a flocked panel because the flock gives way underneath your hand, whereas the foam doesn't really. So you may have already felt that and had a bit of a clue already. So let's climb up behind the horse, have a little look at the pitch, see if it's matching his back as far as you can view. You can also climb up from the front and have a little look down the front and see if you can see if there's any little gaps. Usually where you'll see it is just in here, just towards the base of the wither. If you've got a really flat backed horse again and a triangular shaped panel, you'll actually notice a bit of a gap up in this top edge of the panel here and the panel contacting further down. There's one more way that you could actually check this if you're really unsure, and that's to use baby powder or talcum powder on the horse's back, and then to pop your panel on and to give it a little bit of a wiggle, not sliding it, but a little bit of a wiggle so it can actually take up the talcum powder. Gently pull your saddle back off again and you'll actually see where the points of contact of your panel were on the horse. That's a really good way, if you're unsure of how good you are at feeling your panel, to test your panel contact with your horse's back.